They called me a failure at my 20-year high school reunion, laughing at my simple uniform and quiet demeanor. But when that black military helicopter descended from the night sky and a colonel stepped out calling me Madam General, their laughter died in their throats, because they had no idea who they'd been mocking all along. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I walked into Westfield High's 20-year reunion wearing my dress blues, thinking I'd finally show them who I'd become. Instead, within minutes, I remembered exactly why I'd left this town behind. The drive to Pine Ridge Country Club had taken me through the same tree-lined streets I'd walked as a teenager, past the coffee shop where I'd spent countless hours studying, past the park where we'd held our graduation party. Everything looked smaller somehow, like memory had inflated the importance of places that were just ordinary. I pulled my Honda Civic into the valet line behind a parade of luxury vehicles that gleamed under the country club's floodlights. A silver Mercedes, a black BMW, a Tesla that probably cost more than I'd made in my first 3 years of service. My car looked like exactly what it was: practical, reliable, unremarkable. The valet, a college-aged kid in a pressed white shirt, approached my window with the kind of smile that dimmed when he saw what he was dealing with. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his enthusiasm notably cooler than what I'd witnessed him show the BMW's owner. "Thank you," I replied, handing him my keys. He gave my car a once-over that clearly said "This doesn't belong here," and handed me a claim ticket without making eye contact. I straightened my dress blue uniform jacket as I walked toward the entrance. Not the fancy one hanging in my closet back in Virginia, the one with the rows of ribbons that told a story most people couldn't read. This was my standard issue dress uniform, clean and proper but unremarkable to civilian eyes. No one here would know the difference between a Bronze Star and a Good Conduct Medal anyway. The country club's entrance was exactly what you'd expect from old money trying to look older: marble columns, brass fixtures, and the kind of crystal chandelier that existed solely to remind you that you probably couldn't afford to replace it if you broke it. The doorman, a portly gentleman in his 60s, opened the heavy glass door with a practiced bow. "Welcome to Pine Ridge, ma'am. Westfield High reunion?" "That's right." Quote, "Wonderful. Registration is just inside to your left." The lobby buzzed with the particular energy of people who hadn't seen each other in decades, all trying to figure out if they should recognize the face looking back at them. Clusters of former classmates stood around with drinks already in hand, voices raised in the kind of animated conversation that came from trying to compress 20 years of life into cocktail party small talk. I recognized faces everywhere, though most of them had been softened by time and good living. The quarterback who'd gained 40 pounds and lost most of his hair. The head cheerleader who'd clearly invested heavily in maintaining her high school figure. The class president who now wore the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. The registration table sat near the entrance, draped in Westfield High's colors, navy blue and gold, and staffed by former cheerleaders who still moved like they owned every room they entered. Behind the table hung a large banner: Westfield High Class of 2004, 2 decades of success. "Name?" asked the blonde woman behind the table. I recognized her immediately. Brittany Phillips, former head cheerleader, the kind of girl who'd made high school feel like a hierarchy with very clear rules about where everyone belonged. "Sarah Mitchell." She squinted at her alphabetical list, running a perfectly manicured finger down the page. Sarah, oh, here you are." She looked up at me, taking in my uniform with barely concealed confusion. "You were an ROTC, right? I remember that." Her tone carried the kind of false brightness people used when they weren't quite sure how to categorize you. "That's right." She handed me a name tag, just a simple white sticker with Sarah Mitchell printed in basic black font. No title, no achievement, no distinction. Around me, I could see other name tags that read Dr. Amanda Pierce, CEO Marcus Webb, Judge Victoria Cross. Mine looked like it belonged to someone who'd simply existed. "You're at table 18, Brittany said, pointing toward the back of the ballroom, just past the bar near the kitchen. I followed her gesture and saw my assigned table in the shadows, tucked between the swinging kitchen doors and the overflow bar where the waitstaff were setting up additional drink stations. The contrast with the front of the room was impossible to miss. The VIP tables sat elevated on a slight platform near the stage, draped in actual gold tablecloths with elaborate floral centerpieces. Elegant placards marked each seat. Dr. Amanda Pierce, Chief of Surgery, Metropolitan Hospital. Marcus Webb, Founder and CEO, Webb Technologies. Victoria Cross, Federal Appellate Judge. These were the golden tables for the golden children, the ones who'd always been destined for greatness. Table 18, by comparison, was standard banquet table dressed in navy blue, with a small centerpiece that looked like it had been ordered from the discount section of the party supply catalog. I could see a few people already seated there, faces I vaguely recognized but couldn't quite place, the kind of classmates who'd existed in the margins of high school social life, just like I had. "Enjoy the evening," Brittany chirped, already turning her attention to the next person in line, someone driving a Mercedes who merited a much warmer greeting. I made my way through the crowd, weaving between conversations that stopped and started around me without inclusion. The ballroom was exactly what you'd expect from Pine Ridge Country Club: soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and walls lined with oil paintings of stern-looking men in hunting attire. Everything designed to make you acutely aware of your place in the social order. Sarah Mitchell? I turned to find myself face-to-face with Tom Bradley, my old lab partner from AP Chemistry. He'd filled out considerably since high school, wearing an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the fact that he'd traded his teenage metabolism for a desk job and regular meals. "Tom, good to see you." "Wow, look at you in uniform. Still playing soldier, huh?" He chuckled at his own joke. "I remember you were always talking about joining the army or whatever. Guess some people actually follow through on their high school dreams." Playing soldier. The phrase hit me like a slap, though I kept my expression neutral. Something like that. "What do you do exactly? I mean, in the military. Are you like I don't know, what do they call it, a drill sergeant or something?" Before I could answer, his attention was already drifting over my shoulder. "Oh man, is that Victoria Cross? I heard she's some big-shot judge now." "Excuse me, Sarah, I've got to say hi." Quote. He was gone before I could respond, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the conversation flow like a rock in a stream. I continued toward my table, passing more clusters of animated reunion conversations. Snippets of success stories floated past me. Just closed a deal worth 8 figures. My daughter's starting at Harvard in the fall. We bought a place in the Hamptons. Table 18 sat exactly where Brittany had indicated, in the shadows near the back. I took my assigned seat between 2 empty chairs and a woman I vaguely remembered from chemistry class. She was scrolling through her phone, occasionally looking up to take photos of other people's conversations, presumably for social media documentation of her reunion experience. From this vantage point, I had a clear view of the stage where a familiar figure was making her way to the podium. Victoria Cross, my former best friend, my old study partner, the girl who'd once sworn we'd be friends forever, stood at the microphone in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly housing allowance. Her auburn hair was styled in the kind of sleek bob that required professional maintenance, and her jewelry caught the stage lights with the subtle gleam of real gold. She carried herself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room, which, given her recent appointment to the Federal Appellate Court, she probably was. "Good evening, Westfield Warriors," she began, her voice carrying easily through the excellent sound system. "It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces, to see how far we've all traveled from those hallways we roamed 20 years ago." Applause rippled through the crowd. From my position in the back, I could see the rapt attention she commanded, the way conversations stopped when she spoke. "You know, when I was invited to speak tonight, I spent some time thinking about what makes a reunion special. It's not just the nostalgia, though we certainly have plenty of that." She gestured toward a large screen that was cycling through yearbook photos and candid shots from our high school years. "It's the opportunity to see how our dreams became reality, how the seeds planted in these halls grew into the lives we're living today." The screen behind her showed a photo from our senior year, the Academic Achievement Awards ceremony. I could see myself in the back row, standing next to Victoria, both of us holding certificates. We'd been inseparable then, study partners who'd pushed each other to excel, friends who'd made plans for the future that included each other. I'm incredibly proud to announce that, as of last month, I've been confirmed as the youngest federal appellate judge in our district's history, Victoria continued, pausing for the enthusiastic applause that followed. It's been a journey that started right here at Westfield, in Mr. Peterson's government class, where I first learned about the importance of justice and public service. I remembered that class. I'd been there too, in the seat right next to hers, equally passionate about making a difference in the world. We'd debated constitutional law during lunch breaks, written mock briefs for cases that captured our imagination, dreamed about careers in public service that would matter. But I never forget my roots, Victoria went on, her eyes scanning the crowd. I never forget the community that shaped me, the teachers who believed in me, and the classmates who challenged me to be better. Her gaze found me in the back, lingering for just a moment. Of course, we all took different paths after graduation. Some of us aimed high and kept climbing. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Others found their own way, discovered different definitions of success. The subtle dig was expertly delivered, wrapped in language that sounded generous while carrying an unmistakable message. A few people glanced back toward my table, some with expressions of pity, others with the kind of relief that came from seeing someone else occupy the bottom rung of the success ladder. I sipped my water and maintained my composure, though inside I felt the familiar sting of being categorized, dismissed, relegated to the margins. After 20 years of learning to read between the lines in high-stakes situations, Victoria's passive aggression felt like amateur hour, but it still found its mark. So tonight, she concluded, let's celebrate not just where we've been, but where we're going. Let's honor the dreams that came true and the journeys that brought us here. Westfield High, class of 2004. The applause was thunderous. People rose to their feet, some whistling, others calling out congratulations. Victoria basked in the attention for a moment before stepping down from the podium, immediately surrounded by classmates eager to bask in reflected glory. I remained seated, watching the social dynamics play out like a complex choreographed dance. The hierarchy was clear. Victoria at the center, surrounded by concentric circles of importance and influence, with people like me occupying the invisible spaces where the light didn't quite reach. That was something, wasn't it? Said the woman next to me, finally looking up from her phone. I'm Karen Walsh. I think we had English together. Sarah Mitchell, yes, I remember. Victoria's really made something of herself, hasn't she? Federal judge. Wow. Karen glanced at my uniform. What about you? What do you do? It was the question I'd been dreading and anticipating all evening. How do you explain 20 years of service to people who measure success in salary figures and job titles? How do you describe a career built on missions that don't make the evening news and achievements that can't be Googled? I'm in the military. Oh, that's nice. Like, stationed somewhere local? Virginia mostly. I travel quite a bit for work. Must be interesting, different from all this corporate stuff. She gestured vaguely toward the front tables where the conversations were getting louder and more animated as the evening's alcohol took effect. Before I could respond, I heard my name being called from across the room. Sarah Mitchell. I turned to see Marcus Webb making his way toward my table, drink in hand, with the kind of confident swagger that came from being featured on magazine covers as 40 under 40 and Tech Visionary of the Year. He'd been 2 years ahead of me in school, the kind of student who'd made programming look effortless while the rest of us struggled with basic HTML. Marcus, I said, standing to greet him. Look at you, all dressed up in your uniform. That's really something. His tone carried the kind of condescension that tried to pass for admiration. Still playing soldier after all these years. There was that phrase again, playing soldier. As if 20 years of service was an extended game of dress-up, a hobby that I'd eventually outgrow and move on to something more serious. Something like that, I replied evenly. So what do you actually do? I mean, day to day, are you like training recruits or pushing papers or what? He took a sip of his drink, clearly enjoying his position as the successful entrepreneur educating the career military person about the real world. I work in strategic operations. Strategic operations, he repeated, as if testing the words. That sounds very official, very strategic. A few people at nearby tables had started listening to our conversation, drawn by Marcus's theatrical delivery. Is that like planning training exercises or supply chain management or something? I could feel the familiar weight of having to defend my choices, to justify a career path that didn't translate neatly into civilian success metrics. How could I explain that strategic operations sometimes meant making decisions that affected the security of nations? That the papers I pushed sometimes contained intelligence that could save or end lives? It's varied work, I said simply. I bet it is, very varied. Marcus chuckled and turned slightly to include the growing audience in our conversation. You know, Sarah here was always the serious one in school. While the rest of us were figuring out how to make money, she was figuring out how to serve her country. Very noble, very selfless. The word selfless came out like an insult wrapped in praise, the kind of backhanded compliment that suggested I'd chosen martyrdom over success, service over ambition. Must be nice, though, he continued, having that steady paycheck, that job security. No worries about market fluctuations or competition or any of that entrepreneurial stress. Just follow orders, collect the benefits, retire with a pension. Several people laughed, not at a joke, but at the comfortable superiority of someone who'd clearly won at life talking down to someone who'd clearly settled for less. I felt the familiar burn of injustice, the frustration of being reduced to stereotypes by people who couldn't begin to understand the complexity of what I actually did. But I also felt something else, a kind of calm that came from knowing exactly who I was and what I'd accomplished, regardless of whether these people could see it or appreciate it. The benefits are good, I said quietly. I'm sure they are, Marcus replied, already losing interest as his attention drifted toward more important conversations happening at more important tables. As he walked away, I caught sight of Victoria across the room, holding court near the bar with a cluster of former classmates hanging on her every word. She caught my eye for just a moment, and I saw something flicker across her face. Not quite pity, not quite satisfaction, but something that suggested she was pleased with how the evening's social dynamics were playing out. I settled back into my chair and surveyed the scene around me. The reunion was hitting its stride now, with conversations flowing freely, and the alcohol loosening tongues and loosening inhibitions. Success stories were being traded like currency, business cards exchanged, connections made and renewed. And in the middle of it all, I sat in my plain dress uniform at table 18, carrying 20 years of experiences that these people couldn't begin to imagine, wearing achievements they couldn't recognize, holding secrets that would probably frighten them if they knew. But they had no idea what those 20 years had really cost me, or what they'd built me into. The evening was just getting started, and already I could feel the familiar weight of being underestimated, dismissed, relegated to the margins of other people's success stories. What they didn't know, what none of them could possibly know, was that sometimes the most dangerous people in the room are the ones nobody notices. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that never get told. And sometimes the people you overlook are the ones who've been protecting you all along. The keynote address was set to begin at 9:30, giving everyone time to finish their dessert and settle into the comfortable anticipation of hearing from their most successful classmate. Victoria had excused herself from the head table 15 minutes earlier, presumably to prepare her remarks and touch up her makeup for what would undoubtedly be the evening's highlight. I excused myself as well, stepping out onto the country club's terrace for some air. The October night was crisp, with a clear sky that revealed more stars than you could see from most suburban locations. The terrace overlooked the 18th hole of Pine Ridge's championship golf course, rolling fairways disappearing into darkness beyond the reach of the clubhouse lights. My phone buzzed in my clutch. Not my personal phone, but the secure device I carried for work communications. The display showed an encrypted message from Langley. Priority alert. Operation Nightfall requires immediate consultation. Stand by for contact. I deleted the message automatically, as I'd been trained to do. Whatever Operation Nightfall was, it would have to wait. I'd specifically requested no contact during my leave, unless it was a genuine emergency. And even then, my handlers knew that maintaining my cover was paramount. But the message troubled me. Priority alerts weren't sent lightly, and the fact that they'd found me here, at my high school reunion, suggested something significant was developing. I thought about the encrypted briefing materials I'd reviewed before taking leave. Scattered intelligence about potential threats to domestic infrastructure, increased chatter around cyber attacks on power grids and communication networks. Getting some air? I turned to find Marcus Webb stepping onto the terrace, drink in hand, his earlier confidence mellowed by several glasses of wine and the satisfaction of an evening spent being the center of attention. Something like that. Hell of a party, isn't it? Victoria really knows how to work a room. He joined me at the railing, looking out over the golf course. You know, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier. About your, what did you call it, strategic operations? That's right. I was talking to a guy at table 3. Turns out he's got a brother who works for some defense contractor in Arlington. Makes serious money, apparently. Government consulting, private security, that kind of thing. Marcus took a sip of his drink. Maybe you should think about making the jump. I mean, 20 years is a good run, but at some point you've got to think about your future. Your real future. There was that phrase again, real future. As if the past 20 years had been some kind of extended internship. A period of preparation for what would eventually become my actual career. The private sector pays a lot better, Marcus continued, and you'd have freedom to actually build something, you know, instead of just following orders and collecting a paycheck. Before I could respond, my secure phone buzzed again. This time it was a call, not a message. The caller ID showed only a series of numbers that I recognized as a Pentagon direct line. "Excuse me," I said to Marcus, stepping away from the railing. "I need to take this." "Sarah?" The voice on the other end was Colonel Janet Morrison, my direct supervisor at Strategic Command. "I know you're on leave, but we have a situation developing." "How urgent?" "DEFCON 3 urgent. We've detected a coordinated cyber attack on 3 major power grids. The signature matches intelligence we've been tracking for 18 months. The same group that hit the European networks last spring." I felt the familiar shift in consciousness that came with genuine crisis. The way training took over and personal considerations faded into background noise. Timeline? "The attack started 2 hours ago. We think they're probing for vulnerabilities before launching something bigger. NSA is tracking communication spikes that suggest a major offensive is planned for tonight." Tonight? I glanced back toward the clubhouse, where I could see my classmates through the glass doors, laughing and drinking, and celebrating their various successes. "What do you need from me?" "Your analysis. You're the only one who's seen the full intelligence picture on this group. The Joint Chiefs want your assessment within the hour." I checked my watch. 9:25. Victoria's keynote was about to begin, and I was about to disappear to deal with a potential national security crisis that none of these people would ever know about. "I'll need secure communications and access to the classified servers. We're sending transport. ETA 15 minutes. Can you get to the parking lot without drawing attention?" "Understood." I ended the call and turned back to Marcus, who was watching me with curious eyes. "Everything okay? You look like someone just told you the world was ending." In a way, someone had. But Marcus would never know that. Would never understand that while he was networking and celebrating his IPO success, other people were working to prevent the kind of catastrophic infrastructure failure that could collapse the comfortable world he took for granted. "Work call," I said simply. "At 9:30 on a Friday night? Man, government work really is different. No boundaries, huh?" He chuckled. "That's exactly why I could never do what you do. I need my freedom." Freedom. The word sat strangely in my mind as I made my way back into the clubhouse. Marcus had freedom. The freedom to build wealth, to choose his projects, to celebrate his achievements at country club reunions. But he also had the freedom that came from ignorance, from not knowing about the threats that required other people to sacrifice their Friday nights to keep the lights on. The ballroom was settling into attentive quiet as Victoria took the stage for her keynote address. I slipped back to my table, calculating how long I could stay before I'd need to make my exit. 15 minutes until transport arrival meant I had maybe 10 minutes to listen to Victoria's speech before disappearing into the night. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC announced, please welcome our keynote speaker, the Honorable Victoria Cross. The applause was thunderous as Victoria approached the podium with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command attention. She looked radiant under the stage lights, every inch the successful federal judge who'd risen above her humble origins to achieve real power and influence. Thank you all so much, she began, waiting for the applause to die down. It's truly an honor to speak to you tonight, to look out at this room full of friends and classmates who've all found their own paths to success and fulfillment. I checked my phone. The transport would be here soon, and I'd need to slip out without causing a scene. The last thing I needed was to draw attention to myself when I was about to disappear into a classified crisis. 20 years ago, Victoria continued, we sat in this same auditorium for our graduation ceremony. We were 18 years old, full of dreams and plans and absolute certainty about how our lives would unfold. Some of those dreams came true exactly as we imagined. Others took unexpected turns. Quote, she paused, her eyes scanning the crowd before landing briefly on me in the back. I think about the conversations we had in those days, about justice, about public service, about making a difference in the world. Some of us found ways to serve in the spotlight, in courtrooms and boardrooms and public forums. Others chose quieter forms of service, paths that don't always receive the recognition they deserve. The comment was delivered with apparent generosity, but I could hear the subtle condescension underneath, quieter forms of service, paths that don't receive recognition. She was being gracious to the less successful, acknowledging the teachers and social workers and military personnel who'd chosen service over ambition. My phone vibrated with a text, transport arriving, 2 minutes. I needed to leave now, but something kept me in my seat. Maybe it was 20 years of being dismissed and overlooked. Maybe it was the weight of knowing that while Victoria spoke about public service, I was about to disappear to handle a crisis that could affect millions of people. Maybe it was just exhaustion with being polite about other people's assumptions. I want to share a story with you, Victoria was saying. A story about choices and paths, and the different ways we can serve our communities. Recently, I had the privilege of sentencing a domestic terrorist who'd attempted to hack into our nation's power grid. This individual thought they were fighting some kind of righteous war against the system. My blood went cold. Victoria was talking about United States versus Morrison, a case I'd provided crucial intelligence for, working undercover for 6 months to infiltrate the hacker network and provide the evidence that led to the conviction. She was describing my work without knowing it, dismissing the terrorist threat that I'd helped neutralize. What struck me about this case, Victoria continued, was how easy it is for people to convince themselves that their small acts of rebellion matter in the grand scheme of things. This hacker thought he was a warrior fighting against oppression. In reality, he was just a criminal who threatened the infrastructure that keeps our society functioning. She paused for effect, completely unaware that she was describing the exact kind of threat I was about to leave to address. It reminded me that real public service happens in courtrooms and legislatures and boardrooms, places where you can actually make policy and create lasting change. Not in the shadows, not in some fantasy of secret importance, but in the light where your work can be seen and measured and held accountable. The implicit criticism was clear. Real service happened in public, in places where achievement could be recognized and celebrated. Everything else was just people convincing themselves that their invisible work mattered. My phone buzzed again. Transport ready. Immediate departure required. I stood up quietly, preparing to slip out the back exit. But as I moved toward the door, someone's chair scraped against the floor, drawing attention. Several people turned to look, including Victoria on the stage. "Oh," she said into the microphone, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "Sarah, are you leaving us already?" Every head in the room turned to look at me. Suddenly, I was caught in the spotlight of collective attention, standing awkwardly in the aisle while Victoria looked down from the stage with that practiced smile. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I have to go." "Work emergency?" Victoria asked, her tone suggesting gentle amusement at the idea that someone at my level could have urgent work responsibilities on a Friday night. "Something like that." "Well, that's dedication for you," Victoria said to the crowd, getting a few chuckles. Some people never really leave the office, do they? Even at our reunion. The laughter was good-natured but patronizing, the kind of gentle mockery reserved for people whose work was seen as less important, less demanding than real careers with real responsibilities. I was halfway to the exit when the first sound reached us, a low rumble in the distance, barely perceptible through the clubhouse walls. A few people glanced around, puzzled. Someone near the windows squinted into the darkness outside. The rumble grew louder. Victoria paused her speech, looking around with the first sign of uncertainty she'd shown all evening. Is that thunder? But I knew what it was. I recognized the distinctive sound of military helicopter rotors, the deep thrumming of aircraft designed for rapid deployment and crisis response. My transport wasn't arriving in a discreet sedan as I'd expected. The sound grew louder, more distinct. People began murmuring, looking toward the windows. Someone said, "That sounds like a helicopter." Then the lights started flashing outside, bright white searchlights that cut through the darkness and illuminated the golf course like a landing zone. The helicopter was coming in fast and low, its rotors creating a thunderous roar that made the clubhouse windows rattle. "What the hell?" someone shouted. Panic rippled through the crowd as people realized this wasn't a distant aircraft passing overhead. This was something landing right outside their reunion, something official and urgent, and completely outside their understanding of how Friday nights were supposed to unfold. The helicopter touched down on the 18th fairway, its rotors still spinning, its lights blazing. Through the windows, we could see figures emerging from the aircraft, military personnel in full combat gear, moving with the crisp efficiency of special operations. The clubhouse had gone completely silent except for the rumble of helicopter engines. 300 alumni stood frozen, staring through the windows at a scene that belonged in an action movie, not a high school reunion. A sharp knock at the main entrance. Then the doors opened, and Colonel Janet Morrison strode into the ballroom in full dress uniform, her bearing unmistakably command-level military. Behind her came two other officers, their ribbons and insignia marking them as senior Pentagon personnel. Every eye in the room followed them as they walked directly toward me, their boots clicking on the hardwood floor with military precision. The silence was absolute now, 300 people holding their breath as they watched something completely outside their experience unfold in real time. Colonel Morrison stopped directly in front of me and came to attention, her voice carried clearly through the silent ballroom. "Major General Mitchell. Ma'am, the Joint Chiefs require your immediate presence for crisis consultation. We have transport standing by." The words hit the room like a detonation. Major General. Several people gasped audibly. Someone dropped a wine glass, the sound of shattering crystal sharp in the sudden silence. From the stage, Victoria's face had gone completely white, her mouth open in shock. Marcus Webb, standing near the bar, whispered, "What the fuck?" loud enough for half the room to hear. Colonel Morrison continued, her voice formal and respectful. "Ma'am, we have a developing situation with the infrastructure cyber attacks. Your analysis is critical for our response strategy." I looked around the room at the faces staring back at me, expressions of shock, disbelief, confusion, and dawning recognition. These were people who'd spent the entire evening categorizing me as a minor success at best, someone who'd chosen service over ambition, dedication over achievement. They'd had no idea they were looking at a 2-star general. They'd had no idea that the quiet woman at table 18 outranked every officer at the local military base, that her security clearance was higher than most senators, that her work directly affected national security policy at the highest levels. "Understood, Colonel," I said calmly. "I'll need 5 minutes to collect my things." "Ma'am, with respect, we don't have 5 minutes. The situation is escalating rapidly." I nodded and turned toward the crowd. For the first time all evening, I had their complete attention. 300 successful alumni hanging on my every word, trying to reconcile the unassuming woman they'd been dismissing with the reality of who I actually was. "I apologize for the interruption," I said, my voice carrying easily through the silent room. "Duty calls." Victoria finally found her voice. "Sarah, I had no idea." "No," I said quietly, meeting her eyes across the room. "You didn't." I walked toward the exit, my escort falling into formation around me. As we moved through the crowd, people stepped back automatically, creating a clear path to the door. The same people who'd been condescending to me about my modest career choices now looked at me like I was a completely different species. At the door, I paused and turned back one final time. The entire room was still frozen in shocked silence, staring at me like they'd just witnessed someone transform into something completely unexpected. "For what it's worth," I said, "the work has been rewarding." Then I walked out into the night, toward the waiting helicopter and the crisis that required my attention. Behind me, the reunion continued in my absence, but I suspected the conversations would be very different for the rest of the evening. As the helicopter lifted off, I could see the clubhouse growing smaller below us, its windows glowing warmly in the darkness. 300 classmates were undoubtedly trying to process what they'd just witnessed, trying to understand how they'd so completely misjudged someone they thought they knew. Some of them would probably Google my name when they got home, only to find carefully scrubbed official biographies that revealed nothing about classified operations or sensitive assignments. Others would convince themselves that this had all been some kind of elaborate mistake or misunderstanding. But a few, maybe Victoria, maybe Marcus, maybe some of the others who'd been so confident in their assumptions, would lie awake tonight wondering what else they'd missed. What other quiet people in their lives might be carrying secrets that would change everything they thought they knew about success and service, and the different ways people could matter in the world. 20 years earlier, I'd walked away from the path that would have led me to rooms like that reunion, to the kind of success that could be celebrated and recognized and measured in alumni magazine profiles. Instead, I'd chosen a different kind of service, one that required anonymity and sacrifice, and the peculiar satisfaction of protecting people who would never know they'd been protected. Tonight, for just a few minutes, that service had become visible. Not because I'd chosen to reveal it, but because the world had demanded that I prioritize duty over social comfort, mission over personal convenience. As we flew through the night toward whatever crisis awaited, I thought about Victoria's speech about real public service happening in the light where it could be seen and measured. She wasn't wrong, exactly. Judges and legislators and corporate leaders did important work that deserved recognition. But someone also had to work in the shadows, to handle the threats that never made the news, to make the hard choices that kept the lights on, and the networks running, and the comfortable world of reunion dinners safe from the people who would destroy it given the chance. And sometimes, just sometimes, those shadows were illuminated by helicopter searchlights, and the quiet people stepped forward to reveal that they'd been there all along, protecting everything that mattered while asking for nothing in return except the chance to serve. The reunion would become a story that my classmates would tell for years, the night their assumptions were shattered by the sound of helicopter rotors and the reality of someone they'd never really seen. Some would learn from it. Others would find ways to dismiss it, to minimize its significance, to preserve their comfortable beliefs about how the world really worked. But for one night at least, the invisible had become visible, the overlooked had been seen. And the people who thought they knew what success looked like had learned that sometimes the most important stories are the ones that never get told. At least, not until duty calls and helicopters land, and the quiet people step forward to remind everyone that the world is more complex and dangerous and carefully protected than most people ever imagine. And sometimes, the people you overlook are the ones who've been watching over you all along. What did you think of Sarah's transformation from overlooked to undeniable? Like, if this story moved you, comment your thoughts below. Subscribe for more inspiring stories of hidden strength and unexpected revelations. The dinner bell chimed at 8 o'clock sharp, and the crowd began migrating toward their assigned tables like a well-orchestrated ballet of social hierarchy. The VIP tables filled first, distinguished alumni taking their places at the golden tables with practiced ease, their conversations punctuated by knowing laughter and the subtle clink of expensive jewelry. I watched from table 18 as Victoria made her grand entrance to the head table, pausing to greet admirers along the way. She moved through the crowd like royalty at a state dinner, accepting congratulations and praise with the gracious humility of someone who'd grown accustomed to being exceptional. Ladies and gentlemen, announced the evening's MC, a balding man in his 50s who'd been our class president and now clearly relished any opportunity to command a microphone. Please take your seats as we begin our evening of celebration and recognition. The woman next to me, Karen, had been joined by two other table mates I vaguely recognized. There was Jim Morrison, who'd been in my calculus class and now apparently worked in insurance, and Linda Stevens, former drama club member who kept checking her phone and sighing dramatically about having to miss her daughter's soccer game for this event. So Sarah, Jim said as the waitstaff began distributing salads, Karen mentioned you're in the military. That's really something. My brother-in-law was in the Navy for a few years before he got into real estate. Is that right? I replied, cutting into my iceberg lettuce. Yeah, he always said the discipline was good for him, but eventually he needed to get out and make some real money. You know how it is. The military's great for learning structure, but at some point you've got to think about your future. Linda looked up from her phone. How long have you been in? It must be nice having such job security in uncertain times. 20 years. 20 years? Jim's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Wow, that's really commitment. You must be close to retirement then. What's the plan after that? Government contracting? Security consulting? The assumption was automatic, that military service was a temporary phase, a stepping stone to something more substantial, more legitimate in the civilian world. The idea that someone might build a complete career, might find fulfillment and purpose in uniformed service, seemed to exist outside their framework of understanding. I haven't decided yet, I said simply. From the head table, Victoria's laughter carried across the room, bright and musical. She was regaling her table mates with some story that had them all leaning in, hanging on her every word. I caught fragments of her voice over the general dinner conversation, and when the Chief Justice said, followed by another burst of appreciative laughter. The MC returned to the podium, tapping his wine glass with a knife to get everyone's attention. Before we move on to our main course, I'd like to take a moment to recognize some of our most distinguished alumni. These are classmates who've truly made their mark on the world, who've achieved the kind of success that makes all of us proud to call them warriors. He began reading from a prepared list, each name accompanied by thunderous applause and calls of "Speech, speech!" from various corners of the room. Dr. Amanda Pierce, Chief of Surgery at Metropolitan Hospital, who last year pioneered a new cardiac procedure that's saving lives across the country. Amanda stood gracefully, waving to the crowd with the practiced modesty of someone who'd grown comfortable with recognition. She was seated at table 2, just slightly elevated from the rest of us, her success acknowledged but not quite at the Victoria Cross level. Marcus Webb, founder and CEO of Webb Technologies, whose innovative software solutions have revolutionized supply chain management for Fortune 500 companies worldwide. Marcus rose from table 1 with a confident grin, raising his wine glass in acknowledgement. Someone shouted, "Tell us your net worth, Marcus," which got a big laugh and a theatrical shrug from the man himself. And, of course, the MC continued, building to his crescendo, our evening's keynote speaker, the Honorable Victoria Cross, confirmed just last month as the youngest federal appellate judge in our district's history. The applause for Victoria was the loudest yet, sustained and enthusiastic. She stood slowly, allowing the moment to build, then raised both hands in gracious acknowledgement. Even from my position in the back, I could see the satisfaction on her face, the way she absorbed the adulation like someone who'd been waiting 20 years for this exact moment. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying easily through the room even without the microphone. "Thank you all so much. This means more to me than you know." Quote. As the applause died down and Victoria took her seat, the MC scanned the room with theatrical drama. Now, I know there are many other success stories here tonight, stories of achievement and growth and contribution to our communities. If anyone else would like to share their accomplishments with their classmates, please, don't be shy. Several hands went up around the room. A woman from Table 7 announced her recent promotion to partner at her law firm. A man from Table 5 shared news of his daughter's acceptance to MIT. Another classmate proudly described his successful restaurant chain expansion. Each announcement was met with appropriate applause and congratulations. The room buzzed with the energy of people who'd found their place in the world's hierarchy of success, who'd translated their high school promise into adult achievement. "Anyone else?" the MC asked, his eyes sweeping the room. For just a moment, his gaze lingered on our table in the back. "Come on, don't be modest. We want to hear from everyone tonight." Jim next to me shifted uncomfortably. Linda suddenly became very interested in her dinner roll. Karen fumbled with her phone. The silence from table 18 stretched awkwardly. "Well," the MC said with forced cheerfulness, "I'm sure there are plenty of stories we haven't heard yet. Sometimes the most interesting journeys are the quiet ones, right?" The comment was meant to be inclusive, but it landed like a consolation prize. The quiet ones. The stories that didn't merit spotlight time. The lives that had value but not the kind that translated into reunion bragging rights. As dinner continued, I found myself observing the social dynamics with the kind of analytical detachment I'd learned in intelligence briefings. The room had clear hierarchies. The elite tables near the stage, the solid middle-class achievers in the center, and the margins where people like me sat with our unremarkable careers and modest accomplishments. Conversations flowed differently at different tables. At the head table, I could see animated discussions punctuated by frequent laughter and knowing nods. These were people who spoke the same language of success, who understood each other's references to country clubs and private schools and investment portfolios. At our table, the conversation was more tentative, more defensive. Jim talked about his insurance agency with the careful enthusiasm of someone who knew it wasn't glamorous, but was determined to find dignity in honest work. Linda mentioned her part-time job at the community theater with the kind of wistful pride that suggested dreams deferred rather than dreams achieved. "So Sarah," Karen said during a lull in the conversation, "do you ever think about what you might have done differently? I mean, if you could go back and choose a different path?" It was the kind of question that contained its own assumptions, that my path had been somehow lacking, that given the chance to do it over, I'd obviously choose something more successful, more prestigious, more worthy of recognition at a reunion like this. "I don't really think about it that way," I replied. "Really? I mean, don't get me wrong, serving your country is admirable and all that. But sometimes I wonder, what if you'd gone to law school like you planned? You and Victoria were so close senior year. You could have been up there with her tonight." The comment hit harder than it should have. Karen meant no harm. She was just making conversation, trying to relate to someone whose life choices she couldn't quite understand. But the implication was clear. I'd had potential once, possibilities that had somehow been squandered or abandoned. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Victoria and I had indeed planned to attend law school together. We'd studied for the LSATs together, applied to the same schools, made plans for roommates and study groups, and the brilliant legal careers we'd build side by side. The acceptance letters had come the same week as my ROTC commission, Georgetown Law School, and a full scholarship to one of the most prestigious programs in the country. My parents had been thrilled, my teachers proud, my future seemingly mapped out in golden detail. But I'd also received another letter that week, one that would change everything, though I couldn't have known it at the time. A letter from the Department of Defense offering me a position in a specialized intelligence program, something so classified that even the recruitment materials were vague about specific duties. I remembered the conversation with Victoria in her dorm room, surrounded by law school brochures and course catalogs. "You're really going to turn down Georgetown for the military?" she'd asked, her voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and disappointment. "It's not just the military," I tried to explain. "This is something different, something important. Law is important too, Sarah. We could do real good in the world. Change things, make a difference." "I know, but this feels like what I'm supposed to do." She'd looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language, like I'd suddenly become someone she didn't recognize. "I just don't understand why you'd throw away everything we planned for some vague military thing." I hadn't been able to explain it then, and I certainly couldn't explain it now to a table full of classmates who measured success in salary figures and social recognition. How do you describe the pull of service, the calling, to something larger than personal achievement? How do you explain that some paths can't be measured in conventional metrics of success? The main course arrived, chicken cordon bleu or salmon, presented with the kind of careful plating that justified the country club's reputation. Around me, conversations continued about promotions and acquisitions and children's achievements, the comfortable currency of middle-class success. From the front of the room, Victoria's voice carried over the general din. She was telling another story, something about her recent cases that had her tablemates laughing and nodding appreciatively. Even from this distance, I could see the way she commanded attention, the natural charisma that had made her class president and debate team captain and now federal judge. "Excuse me," said a voice behind me. I turned to see Michael Torres, who'd been our class valedictorian and was now apparently some kind of tech executive based in Silicon Valley. He was holding a wine glass and wearing the kind of confident smile that suggested he was about to share something he found particularly amusing. "Sarah Mitchell, right? I heard you were here. Man, that takes me back. You were always so serious about that ROTC stuff." "Michael." I stood to shake his hand, noting the expensive watch and the perfectly tailored suit that screamed successful entrepreneur. "So I was just talking to Marcus Webb over there, and he mentioned you're still in the military, after all these years. That's really dedicated of you." The word dedicated came out with the same condescending tone Marcus had used earlier, as if dedication was a consolation prize for people who couldn't figure out how to be successful. "What do you do exactly?" Michael continued. "I mean, specifically, are you like training new recruits, or working in logistics, or..." "Strategic operations." "Strategic operations," he repeated thoughtfully. "That sounds very important, very strategic." A few other people had drifted over, drawn by the conversation. "Is that like planning military exercises? War games? That kind of thing?" I could feel the familiar weight of having to defend choices that couldn't be defended, at least not in terms these people would understand. "How do you explain that strategic operations sometimes meant preventing wars rather than planning them? That the exercises I helped design weren't games at all, but preparations for scenarios that kept other people safe in their suburban comfort?" "Something like that," I said. "Must be fascinating work," said Jennifer Walsh, who'd appeared at Michael's elbow. I remembered her as student body treasurer, and apparently she'd parlayed that into a career in corporate finance. Very different from what the rest of us ended up doing. "Different how?" I asked. "Well, more service-oriented, less focused on personal advancement. It's admirable, really. Not everyone has the temperament for that kind of selfless work." There was that word again, selfless, wielded like a polite insult. The implication was clear. I'd chosen service over success, sacrifice over achievement, dedication over ambition. In their framework, these were admirable qualities, but ultimately limiting ones. The choices of someone who'd prioritized idealism over practical results. "The military's been good to me," I said simply. "Oh, I'm sure it has," Jennifer replied. "The benefits are supposed to be excellent. Healthcare, retirement, all that job security. It must be nice not to worry about market fluctuations or competition." Michael nodded knowingly. "That's the thing about government work. You trade potential upside for stability. Smart choice for some people." The conversation continued around me, with various classmates offering their observations about military service and government employment. They spoke about my career choices the way you might discuss someone's decision to become a teacher or a social worker. Admirable in its way, but ultimately a path chosen by people who valued security over ambition, service over success. I listened to their analysis of my life with the kind of detached professionalism I'd learned in interrogation training. They weren't being malicious, exactly. They were simply operating from a worldview where success was measured in dollars and status symbols, where achievement was defined by recognition and advancement through corporate hierarchies. In their framework, my 20 years of service represented a kind of extended adolescence, a failure to grow into the adult responsibilities of wealth accumulation and status acquisition. I was admirable in the way that missionaries or aid workers were admirable, doing important work that they themselves would never choose, sacrificing personal advancement for the greater good. What they couldn't see, what they had no framework for understanding, was that some forms of success couldn't be measured in reunion bragging rights. Some achievements were classified, some victories were celebrated in classified briefing rooms rather than country club ballrooms. As the conversation began to wind down and people drifted back to their own tables, Victoria appeared at my side. She'd been making rounds through the room, working the crowd like the seasoned politician she'd become, and now she'd finally made her way to the back tables. "Sarah," she said warmly, though her smile carried that practiced quality of someone who'd learned to be gracious to everyone, regardless of their importance. "I was hoping we'd get a chance to talk tonight." "Victoria, congratulations on the appointment. Federal judge. That's quite an achievement." "Thank you. It's been a wonderful journey." She paused, glancing around at the modest table setting, the marginally interested faces of my table mates. "You know, when I heard you were coming tonight, I wasn't sure what to expect. It's been so long since we've really talked." "It has been a long time. I often think about senior year, about all those plans we made, law school, changing the world, all those late-night conversations about justice and public service." Her expression grew wistful, tinged with what might have been genuine nostalgia. "Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if you'd taken that path. We could have been colleagues by now, maybe even partners." The comment was delivered with apparent kindness, but it carried an unmistakable subtext. In Victoria's world, I'd made the wrong choice, taken the wrong path, ended up as a cautionary tale rather than a success story. "I took a different kind of public service," I said quietly. "You certainly did. And that's admirable, really. Not everyone has the temperament for military life. It takes a special kind of person to be satisfied with that level of anonymity." The word hung in the air between us. Anonymity. As if my life had been somehow diminished by the fact that my achievements couldn't be Googled or featured in alumni magazines. "The work has been rewarding," I replied. "I'm sure it has. In its own way." Victoria glanced at her watch, a delicate piece that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "I should get back to my table. They're starting the awards presentation soon. But it's been so good to see you, Sarah. Really." She moved away with the same graceful efficiency she'd shown all evening, pausing to chat briefly with other tables before returning to her position at the head table where she belonged. I settled back into my chair and watched the awards presentation begin. Various alumni were called forward to receive recognition for their contributions to their communities, their professions, their alma mater. Each recipient shared a brief speech about their journey from Westfield High to their current success. The stories followed predictable patterns: overcoming challenges, seizing opportunities, building something meaningful through hard work and determination. These were people who'd translated their potential into measurable achievement, who'd created lives that could be celebrated and recognized, and held up as examples for others to follow. As the evening progressed, I found myself thinking about paths not taken, choices made and unmade, the strange lottery of how high school classmates end up scattered across the spectrum of what society considers success. 20 years ago, sitting in government class next to Victoria, I'd had no way of knowing that my choice would lead me so far from this world of recognition and celebration. I'd had no way of knowing that dedication to service would mean a kind of professional invisibility, that protecting others would require protecting the very secrets that might have earned me respect in rooms like this. But I'd also had no way of knowing what that choice would build me into, what it would teach me about strength and purpose, and the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes from work that matters even when no one applauds. The evening was reaching its crescendo now, with Victoria preparing for her keynote address. The room had grown more animated as the alcohol flowed and the shared nostalgia deepened. People were taking more photos, exchanging more contact information, making promises to stay in touch that probably wouldn't survive the drive home. And I sat at table 18, invisible in plain sight, carrying 20 years of experiences that would probably frighten these people if they knew, wearing achievements they couldn't recognize, holding secrets that protected the very comfort and security they took for granted. The irony wasn't lost on me. In a room full of people celebrating their success at building visible, measurable lives, I was the one whose work actually mattered most, and the one who could never talk about it. But the evening wasn't over yet, and sometimes the people you overlook are the ones holding the most interesting secrets of all,